What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. My name is Joey, and today we have another weekend of unofficial Riftbound tournaments in the books, and I am super hyped to say that our boy Volibear is making his first top cut appearance in any tournament that I've ever seen. So we're going to break down these two tournaments that took place over the weekend. For a little bit of background for you guys, I've been playing competitive card games for about 10 years. I played multiple card games at the highest level, so we're going to infer whatever we can about the meta from these tournaments. It seems like week to week everything is kind of shaking up, so let's get right on into it. Our first tournament over the weekend was a 128 player tournament hosted by Piltover Archive themselves, as well as Rift Lab. So shouts out to them for putting on such an awesome event. Your top 8 is as follows. First place we have Set, second place Darius, third place Master Yi, fourth place Volibear, once again making his debut in any top cut that I've ever seen. And we have 6th through 8th rounding out with several Master Yis. So this top 8 definitely a bit more centralized in terms of leader percentages. We have Master Yi taking 50% of this top 8. So even though it didn't win the event, Master Yi is still supporting the allegations that it is the deck to beat in set 1 format, but we'll see how things progress from here. And then for our second event, we have the first tournament of the Riftbound France Cup Season 0. So this is a bit of a smaller tournament, 16 players. So let's take a look at our top 4 here. We have first place Master Yi, once again, supporting the allegations. Second and third place, both Volibear. And we have fourth place Teemo. So yet another contender we haven't seen in really any top cut that I can recall, and that is Teemo. Going to be very excited to take a look at this week's deck list. As always, we'll take a look at the highest placing deck list for each leader, but since we have 2 tournaments to talk about, we'll take a look at the highest placing list in each tournament. So let's go ahead and start with the Rift Lab trial. All right, our first place set list from the Riftbound trial looks like a predominantly orange build, although if we look at the power costs, we don't see any yellow power or yellow runes required, so I do wonder why we're even playing any yellow runes, because it seems like you're asking for trouble when you do that. But anyways, for the battlefields, we have Reckoner's Arena. We'll see what kind of hold abilities we want to be taking advantage of, probably Kiana. Vilemaw's Lair continuing to show up in some higher placing lists. I think the good thing about this thing that I didn't really consider before is that it can heavily punish opponents from taking early points, because in a lot of cases they're probably just sacrificing units that they put here. And then we have Monastery of Hirana. When you conquer here, spend a buff to draw 1. Set does desperately need draw power, so I think Reckoner's Arena plus Kiana and Monastery of Hirana can be great ways to do that. I just feel like depending on the build you're playing, it's sometimes hard to generate those buffs. So spending them and turning off your leader effect, in a sense, can be a little bit tricky, but we'll see how this build is meant to support that. We start off with 3 of our orange Set. This card was so hated on when it was first revealed, and I really don't know why, because swinging for 8, sometimes 9, if you can rebuff it, can clear out most battlefields. I think this card is very good. Definitely gives you reason to want to run a more orange build of Set rather than a yellow one, or even maybe a hybrid one. And then going through the rest of our units, we of course have the Pit Rookies, the Glory Seekers, the Cythrias are self-buff generators pretty much. Daring Poro, just probably one of the best 2-drops in yellow from a non-buff standpoint. And then going down a little bit further, we have 3 First Mate. I'm always on 2 in my orange builds because it's not a 3-drop you want to see early, but it can definitely set up plays. So increasing your odds of seeing it at a vital time is definitely not a bad thing. And the Kinku Monk, incredible card for this deck specifically because you want to be buffing as many of your units as physically possible. We do have the 3 Fiora and the Kiana to take advantage of the Reckoner's Arena. Try to recur those draws with Kiana after turn. And then if we go through our spell lineup, of course, 3 Showstopper, 3 Sabotage. I think this is basically Defy in orange at this point, because you want to be looking at that hand and preemptively picking out those spells that are going to give you a hard time. Cool thing about this versus Defy, yes, you can't respond to a spell with this card like you could with Defy, but this can hit things like Grand Stratagem or Falling Star that Defy couldn't hit, for example. So there's a big bonus there. 3 of Challenge, 3 of Call to Glory, of course, and then the 1 of Arena Bar. I wonder if this really is just worth the 1 of in all Set decks, just because if you hit it, great, you play it, you have permanent buff generation for the rest of the game. Obviously at 1, you're not going to hit it super consistently, but it might be worth it there. I gotta say though, I do very much like this deck building style where every single thing's a 3 of, except for Arena Bar, because if you're playing everything as 3 of, you need one more card to get you to 40. So I like that this is a very consistent deck. It just does what it does every single game, and if you draw the one Arena Bar, that's fantastic. Going down to our sideboard, we do have 2 Cannon Barrage, and we have 3 Noxian Drummer and 3 Anivia. Very interesting sideboard choices. I wonder where the Anivia comes in most clutch. The issue with Anivia is she's a little bit slow and telegraphed because you play her tapped in your base generally. But I guess if you're on 8 runes, you could play her and then immediately use a showstopper, so that can clear out like a battlefield of tokens, perhaps something small like that. Even stuff that's a little bit bigger than that, because she does deal 3 damage, which is pretty nice. I do wonder why we're not seeing any salvage. I guess this deck might have just not been afraid of any like Aurora or other gear shenanigans. So congratulations to this player for taking first place in a very large tournament. Very awesome stuff. Let's go on to our Darius build. We have the yellow primary here, so it looks like we're probably playing a baited hook list into our battlefields. This all makes sense. We have aggression with War Camp and Arena's Greatest, as well as consistency with Candlelit Sanctum. Let's start with our units here. We have the one of Darius as our chosen champion. I don't think we see any yellow Darius in this build. Our low-cost lineup makes a ton of sense, and we do see the baited hook here. So we're playing all the typical baited hook suspects, Vanguard Captain and Spectral Matron. Of course, you want to be hitting these off your top 5 because they get insane value when they're played without having to use their rune costs. Vanguard Captain, same rune cost as baited hook, but especially on Spectral Matron, where you hit this card and don't have to pay the double rune that she costs. Incredible stuff. And we talked about this in a video a few days ago where we have Vayne and Draven coming off top 5 of baited hook as well. Insane value, because Draven, especially when you hit him, he can turn into a 6 or a 7 might unit off the bat. And this list is featuring the red Kaisa, which I don't think the previous successful baited hook Darius list was playing, but it's one of the best cards in red, so definitely can't go wrong there. And we do have a few units we can sack off baited hook to hit this as well, so it seems like it makes a ton of sense to me. And of course, the 3 grand stratagem. Going over to the sideboard here, we do see the yellow Darius in the side deck, so you can side that in and then have it be your chosen champion for the second and third game of a match if you wanted to. That's how that rule works if you weren't sure. And we do have 3 salvage. I think it's just kind of a mandatory thing in yellow at this point. We have 2 Call the Weak and 2 Brynrear Thundersong for when we want to close out games and not have to deal with our opponent's pesky spells like Hidden Blade, Void Seeker, whatever it might be. Very cool list. I am liking the fact that these lists are just very focused on consistency. I do like that quite a bit from what we're seeing from at least these first 2 builds. Let's go into our highest placing Master Yi list. Perfect split on runes here. Lots of draw power in our battlefields, Dreaming Tree and Grove of the God Willow. And we have some rune recursion with Star Tip Peak. Makes a whole lot of sense to me. Going down into our main board, the 1 Master Yi chosen champion. And for the rest of our units, we have 3 Pit Rookie, 3 Stalwart Poro. We have 3 First Mate, 1 Sunlit Guardian, 3 Clockwork Keeper. I am interested to see only 1 copy of Sunlit Guardian and no copies of Wielder of Water. I think Wielder of Water is a card that we're seeing come out of a lot of Yi lists because it's a higher energy investment than something like Stalwart Poro, and it loses to the same removal. So I think that might be the reason why we're not seeing as many copies of that card. I am a little bit curious though, why 3 First Mate over Sunlit Guardian, besides the fact that First Mate, in my opinion, is a combo enabler where you want to see him later in the game. Especially in this deck where you want to play something that costs 3, like a Sunlit Guardian, throw it into a battlefield, have it defend there for the rest of the game. And of course, Sunlit Guardian has the shield, so it's defending for a 4, and then you factor in all the other buffs that this deck can generate for it. I am curious why we're so low on Sunlit Guardian and we're higher on First Mate, so definitely some interesting stuff there. And then for the rest of the unit lineup, we have Kiana, Snapvine, and we see the White Flame Protector on a repeat run again in topping Yi lists. We do know that when you play this card, you buff a unit, it's clearing out just about any battlefield. I'm just still having a hard time coming to terms with, like, Primal Strength does about the same thing for 4 less energy and 1 less rune, right? You get 1 less power, but with all the runes and recycling you're saving on, is it really worth it? Yes, I know, of course, you get the White Flame Protector body itself. It's a huge 8 might unit on its own that on the next turn can clear a battlefield, or you can even play it directly into a battlefield, retreat your smaller unit, and now you have this insurmountable unit that your opponent probably can't even deal with. I'll have to try it out myself and see if it's really worth all the hype, but definitely solid for sure if it's continuously topping and doing well. And let's go back through our spell lineup. Super standard stuff, the Defies, the On Guards, the Charms. I don't think we see any Wind Wall in the main deck or in the sideboard. That is super interesting, but I guess we'll talk about that a bit when we get to Unyielding Spirit. Any other things we want to talk about in the main board? Of course, the 2 Zonias. Surprised to see 2 Primal Strength over 3, but I guess when you're splitting with White Flame Protector, it seems to make sense here. Let's go down to the sideboard, talking about Unyielding Spirit. I think when you're talking about playing this and or playing Windwall, I think the question is, what does Unyielding Spirit answer that you would hope Windwall would also deal with, right? So in this particular scenario, Unyielding Spirit would answer things like Singularity, things like Kaisa's signature spell, Acathian Rain. There's some things that it, of course, wouldn't answer that Defy also can't deal with, which would be Grand Stratagem. Maybe some of the other spells that just kill things as opposed to actually dealing damage to kill things. So there's definitely trade-offs there, but Windwall is, of course, extremely costly on your runes. So it seems like we're trying to punish those types of spells in other ways, maybe with things like Spirit's Refuge. When you buff units, they gain Deflect, so you're punishing your opponent more heavily for choosing them. And we do have 1 Stand United here as well, buffing a unit, and then that buff gives an additional +1, so you're just making it really insurmountable for your opponent to beat you in an honest battle. And let's talk about the one of Paka Cub. I'm surprised to see only 1 here. I gotta say, this is a card that I'm really liking in Yi right now because it gets around a lot of that removal your opponent would use to try to retake control of a battlefield. And we do have the 2 Zonias in the main board, but the downside of Zonias is that it brings the unit back to your base, which still gives your opponent the opportunity to actually take control of the battlefield. And we know that Yi is weaker on offense than it is on defense, but maybe the White Flame Protector and the Primal Strengths kind of help out with that a little bit. I don't know. I'm a little bit bigger on Paka Cub in Master Yi than I am on Zonias, but let me know in the comments below what you think about the comparison of those 2 cards, the pros and the cons, and stuff like that. Now, finally, for the start of the show, even though it didn't win, I am very excited to see Volibear in the top 4 here. So let's take a look. We have an even split on our runes. Battlefields are just what you would expect. Anti-ramp for the opponent and Aspirant's Climb, since we're playing a ramp control deck. Going into our main deck with the units, we do have 1 Volibear Furious. For non-mighty units, we have 2 Vi Destructive and 3 First Mate. So even though we're not ramping off our leader, seems like we're still willing to play these low might cards because they can give us big payoffs later on. Of course, we know that First Mate and Vi can definitely do that. We have 3 Captain Farron, 3 Blazing Scorcher, our standard ramper. We have 2 Darius Trifarian, 3 Carnivorous Snapvine, 3 Misfortune to enable more movement around your board, maybe even some energy regeneration. 3 Brazen Buccaneer as another sort of ramper, although unless you are actually using the discard for this, I think there are other 6 might units that don't actually have power costs that would give you a little bit more value. But if you are going to play this on a turn 2, for example, by actually pitching the card, it does get you ahead on ramp at the cost of some hand size. But of course, we know Cadrigan the Infernal can fix that for you by drawing you back a bunch of cards based on how many mighty units you have in play. And for our spells, we do have the 2 Sabotage, one of the best cards in orange, no surprise. 3 Immobilize, but no Catalyst of Aeons. And that's probably a call that this player made because Catalyst of Aeon into any format that has aggro is probably going to be quite greedy just because if your opponent's off to a quick start, you don't want to be sitting on that additional ramp card in hand. You want to be sitting on either spells to answer those units or your own units to play and then try to clap back. So that makes a lot of sense there. Going down to our sideboard, we do have the 1 remaining Sabotage. I'm most interested by 3 Aurora in the sideboard and none in the main. I wonder why that this deck would side into Aurora as opposed to starting with it and then maybe siding it out if the opponent has ample gear removal, right? Because you can play against a Volibear in game 1 and they might not see Dazzling Aurora, right? But as the opponent, I'm still going to assume it's in their deck. They might have just not drawn into it. So going into game 2 as Darius or some other yellow deck, let's say, I'm still going to side in my salvages. And if you're the Volibear player siding in Aurora, it seems kind of weird to side in gears into my opponent siding in gear hate. So I feel like you might want to do the opposite, where you start with Aurora in your main deck and maybe side it out in games 2 and 3 if you feel like you can get away with it. So I would definitely be very curious to know the rationale and the thought process behind this specific sideboard choice, but I'm sure there's a good reason for it. I just don't have it at this exact moment. But the rest of the sideboard looks like it can be very useful. Let's go ahead and start looking at our top 4 lists from the France event. Alright, in first place, we do see Master Yi, Wuju Bladesman, even split on runes, battlefields, common ones, Godwillow Grove, Dreaming Tree, and we do see Hollowed Tomb, so this player must see some value in being able to recycle Master Yi Honed, which I think definitely can be a good play sometimes. I just usually go into it when I'm actually going to win the game, or if I need to do it as a last-ditch effort, but I do wonder the playstyle where you would want to recycle Yi Honed over and over again. Initial spell lineup seems like everything you're used to seeing. 3-5, 3 on guard, 3 charm, 3 discipline. Units, same thing as well. As for other things in this build, we once again see the White Flame Protector with the 2 primal strength. I'm going to have to try it before I knock it, right? So that's going to be my next testing thing for Master Yi here. And then we see 2 set Brawler. Seems like a somewhat similar option to White Flame Protector, although of course you have to play the set, wait a turn, unless you combo it with First Mate to restand it immediately. But still, I think what these Yi lists are trying to do is adapt to being able to be a bit more offensive when the opponent is actually able to take those battlefields from you. These cards allow you to attack back into battlefields and not just be helpless if your opponent gets the upper hand on you in a key moment. Sideboard, 2 Wind Wall, 3 Challenge, and 3 Unyielding Spirit. So this list is opting for the combination of Wind Wall and Unyielding Spirit. Probably wants to stop things like Grand Stratagem, where Unyielding Spirit can't do that. But a very cool list, once again, showing me ways that I can probably look at Master Yi once again. So we will go back to the drawing boards, of course. And now, we did have Volibear here at 2nd and 3rd place, so we'll take a look at the 2nd placed higher placing build. We do have the same rune split, same battlefield split for our main board. A lot of very similar stuff, honestly extremely similar stuff, although we do see Dazzling Aurora in the main board here specifically, so that makes a little bit more sense to me. Only being out of 2 of those is very interesting, of course, but still, if you see it, you're gonna get crazy value for the rest of the game. Then you got to worry about your opponent siding in gear hate after the fact. And then over to the sideboard, 3 Unyielding Spirit, 1 Sabotage to fix the 2 in our main board, 1 Flurry of Blades with 0 Warwick, I believe. So Flurry of Blades can help with letting extra damage onto something like maybe a Snapvine or something like that, but I am interested to see this without Warwick. And then 3 Brynir Thundersong to, again, ensure game when you have it. Teemo, let's take a look here. We have a much more blue split rather than purple. We go down to battlefields. Makes perfect sense to me. I really like Start to Peak in this deck. I would maybe consider that over Fortified Position, although Fortified Position is going to help you maintain control of battlefields, which is what Teemo wants to do, so you can keep hiding things there. And then moving on to our main board, we have 3 of each Teemo. We have 3 Ravenbloom Student, 3 Blast Cone Fae, very standard stuff for the rest of the units. Ember Monk. So I've been playing quite a bit of Teemo myself. I actually really like this deck. And Ember Monk is honestly an overperformer because you're going to use hiddens just about every single turn. So whether it's Ember Monk on offense going into a battlefield or Ember Monk on defense defending a battlefield, he just gets to such huge numbers of might that it makes it really hard for your opponent to actually beat over this or even remove it via various effects. So very good card. And we, of course, have 3 Nocturne and 3000 Tailed Watcher. Nocturne in particular comboing with not only our Teemo Strategist, but also stacked deck. So you have more and more ways to try to find that Nocturne and get a free body out of it. And then we have our other spell lineup, Stupefy, Guerrilla Warfare. Fight or Flight is very interesting, although it's essentially going to just probably move your opponent's units back to their battlefields so you can win those battlefields more easily and then drop your hiddens there. And then for remaining hiddens, we have Sprite Call, Consult the Past, followed by 2 Rebuke, just too good in purple not to play, dealing with any board. Especially important to consider that it gets around the entire set leader effect. Very good there. And for our sideboard, we're siding into 3 Gusts for when you need it in those more early game matchups, 1 additional Rebuke, 2 Riptide Rex for when you need more removal, and 2 Unchecked Power to come back from when your opponent is absolutely dominating you on the battlefield front. Very cool list. I like this quite a bit. I love the inclusion of 3 stacked deck because I do feel like every purple deck should play it when appropriate. It's just an insane consistency piece that not a lot of other decks have access to. So very cool stuff from these lists. Alright guys, there you have it. Once again, you can find these lists by going right over to piltoverarchive.com and going to their events tab. I'll leave a link to the events tab down in the description below so you guys can get there very easily. But let me know, what did you think about these deck lists? I really like that we're seeing very consistent lists because generally consistency trumps over power more often than not, unless the powerful deck that's not so consistent has a really good run. But these decks seem to be very consistent. What do you think about seeing Volibear do well for the first time? And Teemo, even though it was in a smaller tournament, it's cool to see that in the mix as well. We seem to be having very diverse tournaments every single week. Maybe not so much in the top 8 of the Rift Lab trials where we had 50% Master Yi showing, but maybe that deck was just very popular in the room and that led to a higher conversion rate. Overall though, I'm very happy to see the meta keep developing week after week, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.